Welcome to Rambam in Depth. Today we're going to be discussing the Rambam's opinion about the mitzvah of Riyas Panim Bazara, of showing your face in the courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash. It's the beginning of Hilchas Chagiga, the first perek and the first halacha. The Rambam begins by telling us that Shalosh mitzvahs asay nitztavi Yisrael b'chal regel mishloish regalim. We have three mitzvahs every yontif. Ve'elohein, what are the three? So he says, Hari'iyah, when you show your face, Shenema Yira Kol Zechurcha, it says you shall appear all of your males. Then he mentions the Chagiga and the Karban Simcha. Then he explains, Hari'iyah Hamura B'Teiruhu, what does it mean to appear? Sheyira Panav Ba'azara B'Yom Tov HaRishon Shel Chag, that you should show your face in the courtyard on the first day of the Chag. V'yavi imei carbon ayla, and you bring a carbon ayla with you. Bein min ha'oif, bein min ha'behema, could be from a bird, it could be from a behema. Then he goes on. Misha bala azara b'yem rishon v'lo hevi ayla. If you came to the azara on the first day of Yantif and you didn't bring an ayla, loy dayish loy asa mitzvahs esa. It's not enough that you didn't fulfill the positive commandment of showing your face in the azara, but you also violated the negative commandment. It says, don't show your face empty-handed. You have to bring something. You have to bring the carbon. If you don't bring the carbon, just showing up alone is not a mitzvah. And not only that, it's not a mitzvah, it's also an avera, it's a lav. This seems from the Rambam, and the other Rishonim don't necessarily agree. The Rambam holds that the mitzvah's esa is connected to the mitzvah's leisasa, that the mitzvah's esa is defined by the loisasa. What does it mean to show your face? To show your face with a carbon, because otherwise it would be leira panerekam. Then the Rambam says something else, and this is the point that we're going to discuss briefly. Ve'ein aleika alav zeh. Even if you violated this lav, you did show your face empty-handed, you did not get malchus. Why is that? Shaharei lo'asa ma'isa, because you did not perform an act. There's a klal. There's a machlekes in the Gemara, but we paskin like the day that says, Lab she'ein bei maisa, ein leikin. If a lav, negative commandment that doesn't involve an action, it's inaction, one does not get malchus. So, the question is asked, why doesn't the person get malchus? After all, there was an action. He entered into the Beis HaMikdash, empty-handed. So there was an action. So the Shagas Aryeh, Siman Lamed Beis, explains that just because you did an act that later on was followed by a negative transgression doesn't make that act to be part of the lav, of the prohibition. He gives an example from tzitzis. Tzitzis, if you put on a beged that has four corners without tzitzis, you're over on the mitzvah of tzitzis, but it's called sheva al taisa. It's called a passive way of violating it, even though you put on the talus, you put on the beged. But nevertheless, because the avera itself is in action, not wearing tzitzis, it's not considered to be an action. Here also, he says, the proof is from here. Even though there's action in terms of what you did to get to this point where you violated the negative commandment, but that's only what you did to get to this point. The negative commandment itself, you violated by not bringing a carbon. However, other Mefarshim raise a question from the halacha of Leisash bis Melach. There's a mitzvah in Minatera that you have to bring a carbon, you have to put melach, salt, on every carbon. And then the Torah says, Leisash bis Melach, you shouldn't prevent the melach. In other words, you shouldn't be absent from this mitzvah by not putting melach. It's a lav, it's a negative commandment of leisash bis melach if you didn't put salt. And there the halacha is, and the Rambam paskins and Hilchas Isurim Mizbeach, that if you didn't put salt, any amount of salt on the carbon, you are chayiv malchus, you get lashes. So the question there is why? It's v'lois ashbis, you violated a lav that has no action. You didn't put salt. Elamai, you have to say that the fact that you brought the carbon, you were makriv the carbon, which is an action, and you did it without salt, it's a defective type of hakrava. It's a defective maisa. It's a forbidden action, and therefore there's malchus. So here also, the fact that you entered into the azara and you did it without bringing the carbon, so your entry into the azara is in and of itself a action that is forbidden and therefore should be eligible for malchus. So what's the difference between our case here and Belisashvis Melach? And many Mefarshim, this is in many different Sfarim, come to the same answer and the same conclusion, that when you come into the Beis Hamikdash, into the Azara, and you didn't bring a carbon, you can just you have to bring the carbon out. You can bring it later. You can bring it the next day. You have Tashlumin Kol Shiva. So the actual entry into the Azara is not an Aveira. The Aveira is that you didn't bring later on, you didn't bring a carbon. Masha'enkim by Belisashvis Melech, you brought the carbon, you were makriv it, and you didn't put salt in it. When are you going to put salt? After you finish being makriv the carbon, you'll be makriv another carbon. You can't do that. This carbon was defective, so you brought a defective carbon. That's a maisa. That's an action. I'd like to just add a little diuk of the Rambam in Hilchas Isurim Mizbeach, when he talks about the mitzvah of putting melach, he makes a point of adding that before kaidem, before you put the carbon on the mizbeach, you should put melach. It's not just to tell us the order of things, but it's also telling us that before you even start the hakrava, you have a chiyuv of putting melach. So the very act of not being makriv with melach is a maisa that is defective, and therefore it's a labsha yesh by maisa, and therefore you're eligible for malchus. Over here, there's no chiyuv that says when you walk in, you have to walk in with a carbon. It says when you show your face, you have to bring a carbon. That comes later. The entering into the azara itself is not an avera. It's just when you enter, the Torah says you should not leave without bringing a carbon, but that happens later. So it's a failure to do it. Failure is inaction, is passive, and therefore there is no malchus.